My wife and daughter ignored me for a month, so I left home. 5 years later, my wife asked me to come to our daughter's wedding. Then, my wife started shaking. You ever get ignored so hard you start questioning if you're actually alive? I'm talking next level, professional grade ignoring here. Not just the casual, oh sorry, didn't see you there kind of thing. No, this was Olympic level stuff. The kind that would make a mime jealous of how invisible I'd become in my own damn house. That was me, Marcus Thompson, 45 years old and apparently as relevant as a flip phone at a tech conference. My wife Claire and my daughter Sophia had turned treating me like background furniture into an art form. I'd shuffle into the kitchen every morning, coffee mug in hand, sporting my best good husband and father smile, and chirp out a cheerful good morning, ladies. And what would I get in return? Claire would lift that ceramic mug to her lips like she was performing Shakespeare, taking these long, deliberate sips while staring out the window like she was contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Meanwhile, I'm standing there feeling like a waiter who just asked if everything was okay with their meal. The woman would literally make eye contact with a squirrel outside before acknowledging my existence. And Sophia? Jesus Christ on a cracker. That kid had perfected the art of selective hearing. She'd be hunched over her phone at the breakfast table, shoulders shaking with laughter at some TikTok, where probably some 18-year-old kid was eating hot chips in the shower or doing the latest dance craze that looked like he was having a seizure to music. The girl would literally snort laugh at her screen, but when I'd try to crack a joke or, God forbid, ask about her day, she'd give me the same look people give when they step in dog shit. After 30 days straight of this Twilight Zone bullshit, I started getting paranoid. Like, genuinely worried that maybe I died in my sleep and nobody had bothered to tell me. I'd catch myself checking mirrors to make sure I still had a reflection, testing whether I could still move objects, basic ghost detection stuff. I even Googled signs you might be dead at 2 in the morning, which, let me tell you, is not great for your mental health. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I remember it was Tuesday because that's garbage day and apparently I'd become the designated trash whisperer in this house. I was dragging the bins to the curb, doing my civic duty like a good suburban dad, when Mrs. Henderson from next door waved at me. Actual human interaction. I nearly cried tears of joy. Morning, Marcus. How's the family? She called out. Well, they're pretending I don't exist, so I guess they're doing great. I replied, trying to make light of it. She laughed, thinking I was joking. If only she knew I was being more literal than a GPS giving directions. I went back inside, feeling slightly more human after 30 seconds of acknowledgement from a 70-year-old woman who probably talks to her cats more than I talk to my own family. Claire was loading the dishwasher with the precision of a surgeon, each plate and fork positioned like it was going to save lives. Hey babe, I said, leaning against the counter in what I hoped was a casual, approachable manner. Want to grab lunch somewhere today? That little Italian place you like. She closed the dishwasher door with the kind of finality usually reserved for coffin lids and walked right past me like I was a coat rack. Not even a sorry, I'm busy, or not today, honey. Just complete and total radio silence. That's when it really hit me. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. These two had somehow convinced themselves that I was less interesting than whatever algorithmic garbage was feeding into their phones. Claire probably had more meaningful conversations with her Pilates instructor than she'd had with me in weeks. And Sophia? That kid would rather watch some random dude eat cereal backwards for 15 seconds than listen to her own father ask about her chemistry test. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd helped build, feeling like a tourist in my own existence. The house was immaculate because I cleaned it. The bills were paid because I worked my ass off at that soul-sucking insurance job. The lawn was perfectly manicured because I spent every Saturday morning with that ancient mower, pretending it wasn't older than some of Sophia's teachers. But apparently, all of that made me about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion. You want to know what really twisted the knife? Later that evening, I tried one more time. Sophia was sprawled on the couch, still glued to her phone, occasionally letting out these little giggles that made me think maybe, just maybe, she was in a good mood. Hey Soph, I said, settling into my usual spot on the other end of the couch. What's so funny over there? Share the wealth. She looked up at me with this expression of pure bewilderment, like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics in interpretive dance. Then she turned to Claire, who was pretending to read a magazine, but was obviously listening, and said, Mom, did you hear something? Like a weird noise. Claire didn't even look up from her magazine. Just the house settling, honey. The house settling. I've been reduced to creaking floorboards and random bumps in the night. That night, lying in bed next to my wife who was somehow managing to take up 3/4 of a king-size mattress while simultaneously acting like I wasn't there. I had what some people might call an epiphany. Others might call it a complete mental breakdown. I prefer to think of it as a moment of clarity. I realized I'd spent so many years trying to be the perfect husband and father that I'd somehow managed to become neither. I was like one of those generic store brand sodas, technically the same ingredients as the name brand, but somehow completely forgettable and slightly disappointing. The thought that kept bouncing around my head like a ping-pong ball in a blender was simple. When did I become less entertaining than a dancing golden retriever video on the internet? When did my own family decide that literally anything else in the world was more worthy of their attention than the guy who'd been showing up for them every single day for the past 16 years? That was the night I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living like a ghost in my own life, hoping that maybe tomorrow they'd remember I existed. Because let's face it, tomorrow was just going to be another rerun of today, and I'd already seen enough episodes of The Marcus Show where nobody watches and the ratings are in the toilet. I was done being invisible. I was done being background noise in my own story. Time for this ghost to start rattling some chains. Let me take you back to when things weren't completely screwed up, when I actually believed in fairy tales and thought love could conquer all. Picture this. When I actually believed in fairy tales and thought love could conquer all. Picture this. It's 2007, I'm 28 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, sitting in the most mind-numbing insurance seminar known to mankind. The presenter was droning on about actuarial tables like they were the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I was seriously considering faking a heart attack, just to escape. That's when Claire Martinez walked into my life like a hurricane in heels. She was late, naturally, because punctuality is apparently overrated when you look like you stepped off the cover of a business magazine. Dark hair pulled back in this professional bond that somehow managed to look both serious and sexy, wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my car payment. She was juggling a briefcase, a coffee cup the size of a small bucket, and what looked like half the contents of a Staples store. The universe, in its infinite wisdom and twisted sense of humor, decided that the only empty seat in the entire conference room was right next to me. Claire made her way over, apologizing to everyone she bumped into, which was basically everyone because she moved like she was navigating a minefield in stilettos. She finally reached my row, squeezed past me with more elbows and knees than seemed anatomically possible, and settled into her seat with all the grace of a giraffe trying to sit in a sports car. That's when disaster struck. As she was reaching into her bag for what I assume was a pen, her elbow caught the coffee cup. Time slowed down like we were in some cheesy romantic comedy. I watched that coffee arc through the air in perfect slow motion. A brown tsunami of caffeinated destruction headed straight for my brand new suit. The suit I'd bought specifically for this seminar because my boss said, "Dress for the job you want, not the job you have." Splash. Coffee everywhere. On my jacket, my shirt, my tie, my pants. I looked like I'd been baptized by a barista. The entire room went silent except for the presenter, who kept talking about risk assessment like nothing had happened. Because apparently, a man getting drenched in coffee wasn't nearly as important as discussing premium calculations. Claire's face went through about 6 different shades of red before settling on something that resembled a ripe tomato. Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she whispered, frantically digging through her bag for napkins like she was searching for buried treasure. I sat there, dripping coffee and dignity, watching this beautiful disaster of a woman try to fix what was clearly unfixable. That's when I decided to either laugh or cry, and laughing seemed like the better option for my masculine reputation. "Well," I said, standing up and inspecting the damage. I was getting tired of this suit anyway. Very 2006. I was thinking of going for more of a coffee-stained hobo chic look. She stopped her frantic searching and looked at me like I'd just told her I was actually an alien. Then she started laughing. Not the polite, embarrassed giggle you'd expect, but this full-blown, shoulders shaking, snort-inducing laugh that made half the room turn around and shush us. "You know what?" she whispered, wiping tears from her eyes. "You look like budget James Bond. Like if James Bond shopped at Target and got his gadgets from Radio Shack. Budget James Bond." In that moment, covered in coffee and sitting in the world's most boring seminar, I knew I was going to marry this woman. Don't ask me how I knew, I just did. Maybe it was the way she turned a disaster into something hilarious, or maybe it was because anyone who could make me laugh while I was wearing half of Starbucks inventory was obviously special. Budget James Bond, I said, loosening my soaked tie. "Well, in that case, I should probably introduce myself. Marcus Thompson, at your service. My specialty is getting coffee spilled on me and pretending it's intentional. Claire Martinez," she replied, finally finding some napkins and handing them to me. "My specialty is apparently ruining expensive suits and making terrible first impressions. Who says it's terrible? This is the most excitement I've had at one of these things. Usually, I just fall asleep and drool on myself. This is much more dignified. We spent the rest of that seminar passing notes like we were in high school, making fun of the presenter's tie, which looked like it had been decorated by a colorblind peacock, and coming up with increasingly ridiculous insurance scenarios. What's the premium on alien abduction coverage? Do we offer discounts for people who've never been struck by lightning? That kind of intellectual discourse. By the time they called for the lunch break, I'd forgotten all about my coffee-stained suit. Claire suggested we grab lunch together, claiming she owed me at least a sandwich for destroying my outfit. I suggested she owed me a lot more than a sandwich, but I'd settle for lunch and her phone number. That lunch turned into dinner. Dinner turned into coffee the next day, ironically enough. Coffee turned into a movie date, which turned into long phone calls that lasted until 3 in the morning, which turned into long phone calls that lasted until 3 in the morning, which turned into weekend trips and meeting each other's families and all that relationship progression stuff that makes single people want to throw up. Within 6 months, we were practically living together. Within a year, I'd proposed with a ring that cost more than my car but seemed worth it when I saw her face light up. Within 18 months, we were married in a ceremony that my mother insisted was lovely, but probably cost more than some people's houses. Those early years were like living in a romantic comedy where everything worked out perfectly. We had our own little inside jokes, our favorite restaurants, our Sunday morning routine of sleeping late and reading the paper in bed. Claire would steal my hoodies and I'd pretend to be annoyed while secretly buying bigger ones so they'd look better on her. We'd argue about whose turn it was to do the dishes and make up by the time we finished loading the dishwasher. When Sophia was born 3 years later, I thought we'd hit the jackpot. Perfect little family, perfect little house in the suburbs, I thought we'd hit the jackpot. Perfect little family, perfect little house in the suburbs, perfect little life all mapped out ahead of us. I was going to be the dad who coached Little League and helped with homework and made pancakes on Saturday mornings. Claire was going to be the mom who organized playdates and volunteered at school and somehow managed to look amazing while doing it all. I had visions of family vacations and birthday parties and Christmas mornings filled with wrapping paper and laughter. I pictured teaching Sophia how to ride a bike and walking her down the aisle someday and being the kind of father that kids brag about to their friends. But here's the thing about fairy tales nobody tells you. They're great until real life shows up and starts charging rent. Somewhere between the sleepless nights and the mortgage payments and the daily grind of actually being married to someone, the magic started wearing off. Claire stopped laughing at my jokes and started rolling her eyes. I stopped bringing her flowers and started leaving dirty socks on the floor. We went from being lovers to being roommates to being something even less than that. My mom had warned me, of course. Mothers always know. Marcus, she'd said during our engagement party, pulling me aside while everyone else was arguing about seating arrangements. Don't lose yourself in marriage, honey. Don't become one of those men who disappears into being just a husband and father. You're more than that. I should have listened to her. Instead, I lost myself in the TV remote, which Claire had somehow claimed permanent custody of along with the thermostat and the right to choose what we watched every single night. Looking back now, I can see exactly when things started going sideways. But back then, I was too busy trying to be the perfect husband and father to notice I was slowly becoming neither. If you want to know the exact moment my family decided I was about as useful as a chocolate teapot, it was Sophia's sweet 16. That party wasn't just a birthday celebration. It was the Olympics of disrespect. And somehow I managed to take home the gold medal in getting completely shit on by my own wife and daughter. Let me paint you a picture of the weeks leading up to this disaster. Sophia had been dropping hints about her 16th birthday since approximately her 15th birthday ended. Not subtle hints, mind you. We're talking about the kind of hints that require industrial-grade construction equipment to miss. She'd left magazines open to party planning pages, bookmarked websites on the family computer, and even created a Pinterest board called Sophie's Epic Sweet 16 that had more pins than a bowling alley. Claire, being the queen of reading between the lines when it came to spending money we didn't really have, picked up on these signals faster than a smoke detector in a barbecue restaurant. They'd huddle together on the couch, whispering and planning like they were plotting to overthrow a small government, while I sat in my designated dad chair wondering if I needed security clearance to join the conversation. The party planning became this elaborate production that would have made Broadway directors jealous. We're talking color schemes, themes, guest lists that got revised more times than a Hollywood screenplay, and a budget that kept growing like a cancerous tumor made of glitter and teenage dreams. Dad. Sophia announced one evening. Bouncing into the living room with the kind of energy that usually means my wallet is about to get lighter. I need a professional photographer for my party. I looked up for my newspaper. Yeah, I still read actual newspapers like some kind of dinosaur and tried to process this request. A photographer? Honey, I've got a perfectly good camera. Remember? The one I used to take all those pictures of you when you were little? The look she gave me could have frozen hell over and started an ice age. It was the same look people give when someone suggests using dial-up internet or paying with exact change. Dad, I'm talking about a real photographer. Someone professional who knows about lighting and angles and doesn't cut people's heads off in pictures. Okay, so maybe I'd accidentally decapitated a few relatives and family photos over the years. But in my defense, those cameras have gotten way more complicated than they used to be. Back in my day, you pointed, clicked, and hoped for the best. Sweetie, I said, trying to inject some reason into this conversation, professional photographers cost serious money. Like, mortgage payment money. How about we compromise? I'll watch a few YouTube tutorials, maybe figure out how to not cut off heads, and we'll call it good. Claire, who had been pretending to read her book while obviously listening to every word, finally looked up with that expression she'd perfected over the years. The one that said I'd just suggested we celebrate by setting money on fire. Marcus, she said in that tone that could cut glass, it's her 16th birthday. This is important. Important. Right. Because apparently, everything involving our daughter was important enough to require professional intervention, while everything involving me could be handled with a YouTube tutorial and crossed fingers. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. Call it stubbornness, call it stupidity, call it whatever you want, but I decided to try a different approach. Maybe I could make them laugh, lighten the mood, show them that Dad could be fun and creative too. Don't worry, sweetie, I said, standing up and striking what I thought was a photographer's pose, complete with imaginary camera and everything. I'll just Photoshop your head onto Kim Kardashian's body. You'll look fantastic, and think of all the money we'll save. I thought it was hilarious. I was picturing Sophia's face on some red carpet photo, maybe with a ridiculous caption like Sophia Thompson, reality TV star and high school student. In my head it was comedy gold. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Sophia's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on something that resembled raw hamburger meat. Her mouth opened and closed a few times like she was a fish out of water trying to process weather. Her father had just made the worst joke in human history or completely lost his mind. That's not funny, Dad, she finally managed to say, her voice cracking like she was going through puberty all over again. Before I could explain that it was just a joke, that I wasn't actually planning to Photoshop her head onto anyone's body, Claire swooped in like Superman with a credit card and the maternal instincts of a lioness protecting her cub. Don't worry, baby, she said, shooting me a look that could have melted steel. We'll hire a proper photographer. Someone who knows what they're doing. And just like that, the decision was made. Not by family discussion, not by budget consideration, not by any kind of democratic process. Claire had spoken, and apparently in our household, that was the equivalent of a Supreme Court ruling. Really, Mom? Sophia's face lit up like we'd just told her she'd won the lottery. A real photographer? With professional equipment and everything? Of course, sweetie. We'll get you the best photographer we can find. This is your special day. Sophia practically launched herself across the room to hug Claire like she'd just single-handedly saved Christmas. Meanwhile, I'm standing there feeling like the Grinch who tried to steal Sweet 16. Thank you, Mom. You're the best. This is going to be amazing. Sophia was bouncing around like she'd consumed her weight in energy drinks. Then she turned to me with this look that I can only describe as the way you'd look at something unpleasant you'd accidentally stepped in. Thanks for trying, Dad. Trying. Like I was some kind of well-meaning, but ultimately useless bystander in my own daughter's life. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, and Claire had spent another hour researching photographers online like she was planning a presidential inauguration, she delivered the final blow. You know, Marcus, she said without looking up from her laptop, you don't really contribute financially to these kinds of things. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut by a professional boxer wearing brass knuckles. Don't contribute financially? I worked 40 hours a week at that insurance company, dealing with people's car accidents and house fires and life disasters, bringing home a steady paycheck that kept the lights on and food on the table. But apparently, that didn't count as contributing. Excuse me, I said, trying to keep my voice level. The big things. The important things. When Sophia needs something special, it always comes out of my savings, my credit cards. You just make jokes. Lady, I thought to myself as I watched her scroll through photographer portfolios that probably cost more per hour than I made in a day. I contributed sperm and sarcasm to this family. And apparently that's not enough anymore. But I didn't say that out loud, because even I knew that would have been the end of whatever was left of our marriage right then and there. Instead, I went to bed that night knowing that somehow, in trying to be funny and lighten the mood, I'd managed to prove exactly what they already thought about me, that I was completely and utterly useless. The photographer cost $2,000. The pictures were beautiful. I wasn't in any of them. After the Sweet 16 photographer fiasco, something fundamental shifted in the Thompson household dynamics. It was like Claire and Sophia had attended some secret meeting where they decided that the most effective way to deal with me was to pretend I'd been raptured while they weren't looking. I'm not talking about your garden variety cold shoulder treatment here. This was systematic, organized, and executed with military precision. If ignoring me was an Olympic sport, these two would have been sharing the gold medal and probably getting endorsement deals. It started with breakfast. For 16 years, breakfast in our house had been this predictable little routine. I'd stumble downstairs in my ratty old robe, hair sticking up like I'd been electrocuted, and find Claire already dressed and put together because apparently, she woke up looking like she was ready for a business meeting. Sophia would eventually drag herself to the kitchen looking like she'd survived some kind of natural disaster. Which, let's face it, is pretty much what teenage mornings are. We'd sit around that kitchen table that Claire had insisted on buying from some fancy furniture store, eating cereal or toast, or whatever passed for breakfast that day, and have these mundane conversations about school and work and who was supposed to pick up milk on the way home. Nothing earth-shattering, just normal family stuff that normal families do. But suddenly, breakfast became this elaborate choreographed dance where I was the only one who didn't know the steps. I'd come downstairs expecting the usual routine, only to find empty cereal bowls in the sink and a note on the counter. Gone to get coffee. Back later. CNS. CNS. Like they were some kind of law firm specializing in husband avoidance. The first time it happened, I figured it was just one of those things. Maybe they'd woken up early. Maybe they wanted to have some mother-daughter bonding time. Maybe there was a special at that little cafe downtown that Claire liked. No big deal, right? But then it happened again the next day. And the day after that. And pretty soon, I realized that gone to get coffee was code for anywhere but here with Dad. So I adapted. I started getting up earlier, thinking maybe I could catch them before they escaped. But somehow, no matter how early I got up, they were always one step ahead of me. It was like they'd installed some kind of Marcus detection system that alerted them the moment I was conscious. I'd stumble into the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, eyes barely open, and find fresh coffee in the pot but no sign of human life. Just this lingering scent of Claire's perfume and the faint sound of car doors closing in the driveway. The dinner situation was even more creative in its cruelty. Every evening, I'd come home from work expecting to find some version of the family dinner experience. Nothing fancy, just the three of us sitting around the table, sharing food and conversation like we'd done for years. Instead, I'd walk through the door to find Claire and Sophia sprawled on the couch, surrounded by pizza boxes and Chinese takeout containers, watching some movie or TV show that they'd clearly started without me. "Hey," I'd say, loosening my tie and trying to sound casual, "save me any pizza?" They'd both look up with these expressions of mild surprise, like they'd just noticed a random stranger had wandered into their house. "Oh, we didn't know when you'd be home," Claire would say, not pausing whatever they were watching. "There might be some left in the kitchen. Might be some left." Like I was some kind of unexpected guest rather than the guy who'd been living in this house and paying the mortgage for 16 years. The pizza boxes would be empty except for maybe one sad slice with all the good toppings picked off, sitting there like the consolation prize at a rigged carnival game. Meanwhile, they'd already settled back into their movie, complete with blankets and snacks and that comfortable mother-daughter intimacy that apparently had no room for fathers. I tried inserting myself into their movie nights at first. I'd grab whatever leftover food I could find, settle into my usual spot on the couch, and try to figure out what they were watching. "What's this about?" I'd ask, genuinely trying to participate in family time. "Sure," Sophia would say without looking at me. "We're at the good part." The good part always seemed to be whatever part I'd just walked in on. Every single time. But the real masterpiece of their Ignore Marcus campaign was the grocery shopping incident. I came home from work on a Thursday to find a completely empty refrigerator. Not low on food. Not running out of milk. Completely empty. Like someone had come in with a truck and hauled away everything edible. Claire," I called out, staring into the barren wasteland that used to be our fridge. "Did we get robbed by very hungry burglars?" She appeared in the kitchen doorway with that expression she'd perfected, the one that suggested I'd just asked the stupidest question in human history. "We went shopping," she said, like that explained everything. "Okay, but where's the food?" "We bought what we needed." I opened the fridge again, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Nope. Still empty except for a bottle of ketchup and something that might have been cheese but could have been a science experiment. What you needed was apparently nothing. Claire sighed like I was being intentionally difficult. We got dinner for tonight and breakfast for tomorrow. That's what we needed. What about me? What about you? The question hung there in the air like a bad smell. What about me indeed? What about the guy who'd been eating meals in this house for almost 2 decades? What about the person who'd contributed to the grocery budget every week since we got married? That's when I realized they hadn't forgotten to buy food for me. They'd chosen not to buy food for me. This wasn't oversight or poor planning. This was intentional exclusion with a grocery budget. The final straw came on a Saturday morning when I was trying to find the TV remote. I'd been looking for the damn thing for 20 minutes, checking under couch cushions and between magazines, getting increasingly frustrated because I just wanted to watch the morning news like I did every weekend. Has anyone seen the remote? I called out to the house in general. No response. Hello? Remote? Anyone? Still nothing. I finally tracked down the source of the TV noise to the living room, where Claire and Sophia were both on the couch, the remote sitting right there on the coffee table between them. Hey, I've been looking for that, I said, reaching for it. Sophia grabbed it first, holding it against her chest like I was trying to steal the crown jewels. We're watching something, she said. I just want to check the news real quick. We're at the good part. There was that phrase again. The good part that somehow encompassed everything they ever watched whenever I wanted to use the TV I'd help pay for. Come on, sophomore. Just 5 minutes. She looked at Claire with this expression that I couldn't quite read, like they were having some kind of silent conversation that I wasn't invited to participate in. Did you hear something? Sophia asked Claire. Claire tilted her head, like she was listening carefully. Just the house settling, honey. The house settling. I stood there, invisible in my own living room. While my wife and daughter discussed me like I was a creaking floorboard or a branch scratching against a window. Not a person, not a family member, just some random noise that houses make when they're old and need repairs. That night, I found the divorce papers. They were sitting on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, casual as a grocery list. No ceremony, no dramatic confrontation, no tearful conversation about how we'd grown apart. Just a stack of legal documents with sticky notes marking where I was supposed to sign. No note, no explanation. Grown apart. Just a stack of legal documents with sticky notes marking where I was supposed to sign. No note. No explanation. Nothing. Just 3 words written on a post. It stuck to the front page. Sign here. See? I picked up the papers and flipped through them, seeing my entire marriage reduced to legal terminology and asset division. Custody arrangements that gave me every other weekend like I was some kind of part-time parent who'd never changed a diaper or helped with homework or stayed up all night when Sophia had the flu. That's when I knew I was done being treated like background noise in my own life, done being the house that settles, done hoping that tomorrow they might remember I existed. I was ready to become something more interesting than a creaking floorboard. I was ready to disappear for real. You know that moment in movies where the hero finally snaps and decides to take control of their life? Usually there's dramatic music, maybe some slow motion walking, and definitely better lighting than my kitchen had at 2 a.m. when I made the decision that would change everything. I stood there holding those divorce papers like they were contaminated with some kind of legal disease, reading through the terms that basically reduced me to a weekend visitor in my own daughter's life. Alimony payments that would leave me eating ramen noodles until I was 65. Asset division that somehow made Claire the winner of our 18-year marriage lottery while I got to keep my collection of ties and whatever dignity I had left, which at that point wasn't much. The house was dead quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. You know, the one that was still empty because apparently feeding me wasn't on anyone's priority list anymore. Claire and Sophia were asleep upstairs, probably dreaming about their next father-free adventure or planning new ways to pretend I didn't exist. That's when it hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo full of clarity. I didn't have to sign these papers. I didn't have to play along with their little game anymore. I could just leave. Not leave, like abandon my responsibilities and become some deadbeat dad who sends birthday cards from Vegas. But leave as in remove myself from this toxic situation before it completely destroyed whatever was left of my self-respect. Leave before I became one of those bitter divorced guys who hangs out at sports bars complaining about their ex-wives to anyone who'll listen. I went upstairs to our bedroom. Well, technically it was still our bedroom, but considering Claire had been treating me like a roommate she couldn't wait to evict, it felt more like enemy territory. She was sleeping on her side, facing away from me, taking up exactly her half of the bed with military precision. Even in sleep, she was organized and efficient. I stood there for a minute, looking at this woman I'd been married to for almost 2 decades, trying to remember when we'd stopped being a team and started being opponents. When had sharing a bed become this careful choreography of avoidance? When had the person who used to steal my hoodies become someone who acted like my presence was a personal inconvenience? But I didn't have time for a nostalgic breakdown. I had an escape to plan. I grabbed my old duffel bag from the closet, the one I'd used in college, back when my biggest worry was whether I had enough quarters for the laundry machine. It still smelled faintly of that cheap cologne I used to think made me irresistible to women. Oh, how wrong I'd been about everything. Packing was like playing the world's most depressing game of, what can you fit in a carry-on bag when your entire adult life is falling apart? 3 shirts that still fit reasonably well and didn't have mysterious stains from family dinners where I was apparently invisible. 2 pairs of jeans that I could wear to job interviews if it came to that. And enough socks and underwear to survive the apocalypse. Interviews if it came to that. And enough socks and underwear to survive the apocalypse. Because if there's one thing my mother taught me, it's that you can face any crisis as long as you have clean underwear. I threw in my electric razor, my toothbrush, and a bottle of that expensive shampoo Claire always complained about me using. Hey, if I was going to be homeless, at least I'd have manageable hair. The hardest part was leaving behind all the stuff that represented our life together. Family photos where we actually looked happy. Sophia's artwork from elementary school that I'd insisted on keeping even though Claire said it was clutter. My collection of books that I'd planned to read someday but never got around to because there was always a lawn to mow or a leaky faucet to fix or some other domestic crisis that required immediate attention. I wrote a note and left it on my pillow. Nothing dramatic or accusatory, just gone to think. Don't worry about me. I'm short, sweet, and to the point. The kind of note that couldn't be misinterpreted as either a suicide threat or a dramatic gesture. Just a man removing himself from a situation that had become unbearable for everyone involved. The train station at 3 in the morning is like a purgatory for people whose lives have gone sideways. There were a few other travelers who looked like they were either running from something or towards something, but nobody making eye contact because we all understood that 3 a.m. train travel isn't usually part of anyone's 5-year plan. I bought a ticket to my hometown, 3 hours away, where my parents still lived in the same house I'd grown up in. The house where my biggest problems used to be remembering to take out the trash and avoiding my mother's attempts to set me up with the daughters of her church friends. The train ride gave me plenty of time to think about what I was doing. Was I running away? Maybe. Was I having some kind of midlife crisis? Probably. Was I making the right decision? I had no fucking clue, but it had to be better than staying in a house where I was treated like a ghost with a mortgage payment. The sun was coming up when I rang my parents' doorbell, standing on their front porch with my duffel bag like some kind of middle-aged runaway. I could hear movement inside, probably my dad getting ready for his morning coffee ritual that had remained unchanged since the Carter administration. The door opened, and there was my father in his ancient bathrobe and slippers, hair sticking up at angles that defied physics, squinting at me like he wasn't sure if I was really there or just some hallucination brought on by too much late-night television. "Marcus," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "What the hell are you doing here at this hour?" I held up my duffel bag like it explained everything. "Hey Dad, mind if I crash here for a while?" His eyes went from me to the bag and back to me, and I could practically see his brain trying to process this information. His middle-aged son showing up at dawn with a suitcase was obviously not part of his usual Sunday morning routine. "What did you do this time?" he asked, because apparently even my own father assumed that any marital crisis was automatically my fault. "Thanks, Dad. Really feeling the unconditional love and support here." "I didn't do anything," I said, trying not to sound as defensive as I felt. "Well, nothing illegal anyway. Claire and Sophia have been pretending I don't exist for the past month, so I figured I'd make their fantasy come true." He stared at me for another few seconds, probably wondering if he should close the door and pretend this wasn't happening. Then he sighed and stepped aside to let me in. "Your mother's going to have questions," he said, closing the door behind me. I figured she would. "A lot of questions. I'm prepared for that. Are you prepared to explain why a 45-year-old man is moving back in with his parents?" I looked around the living room that hadn't changed since I was in high school, with the same furniture and the same family photos and the same sense of safety that I'd forgotten existed. "Honestly, Dad, no, I have no idea how to explain any of this. But I'm here, and I'm hoping you'll let me figure it out from here instead of from a house where nobody wants me around." He studied my face for a moment, and I could see him recognizing something there that made him soften just a little bit. "Coffee's almost ready," he said finally. "Your mother will be up in an hour, and then you can tell us both what's really going on." I nodded, grateful that at least one person in my family was willing to acknowledge my existence at 6 in the morning. "Thanks, Dad." "Don't thank me yet," he said, heading toward the kitchen. "You haven't talked to your mother." As if on cue, I heard footsteps upstairs and my mother's voice calling down. Harold? Who was at the door? I looked at my father, who gave me a look that said, "You're on your own now, son." "It's Marcus, honey," he called back. "He's visiting." There was a pause that lasted just long enough for me to question all my life choices. And then, at 6 in the morning, with a suitcase? Yeah, Mom had always been perceptive like that. "I'll put on more coffee," Dad muttered, and I knew that the real interrogation was about to begin. But for the first time in months, I was somewhere people actually noticed I existed, even if they weren't entirely happy about it. It was a start. Starting over at 45 is like trying to learn how to ride a bike while someone's shooting at the tires and questioning your life choices. Everything that seemed easy in your 20s, finding a job, making friends, figuring out where you fit in the world, suddenly feels like climbing Mount Everest in flip-flops while carrying a refrigerator on your back. My mother, bless her interfering heart, had plenty of opinions about my situation. After the initial shock of finding her middle-aged son camping out in his childhood bedroom wore off, she launched into what I can only describe as aggressive maternal management. "You can stay here as long as you need," she announced over breakfast. That first morning, "But you're not going to mope around this house feeling sorry for yourself." I was eating cereal from the same bowl I'd used in high school, surrounded by participation trophies and honor roll certificates that seemed to mock my current state of life failure. "I'm not moping, Mom. I'm processing." "Processing is what cheese does. You're moping." She handed me a mop and bucket like she was presenting me with a Nobel Prize. "The floors aren't going to clean themselves, and neither is your life." So there I was, 45 years old, mopping my parents' kitchen floor while my mother supervised like I was 12 and couldn't be trusted not to spread the dirt around. But you know what? It felt good to have someone acknowledge my existence. Even if that acknowledgement came with chore assignments and unsolicited life advice. The job search was its own special kind of hell. Have you ever tried explaining an 18-year gap in your career progression? Because apparently, raising a family and being ignored by them doesn't count as professional experience in today's market. My first interview was at a marketing firm downtown. The guy across from me looked like he was barely old enough to vote, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car, and speaking in buzzwords that made my head spin. "So, Marcus," he said, consulting his tablet like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I stared at him, trying to come up with an answer that didn't involve admitting that 5 years from now I hope to be living somewhere other than my childhood bedroom. "Well," I said, attempting to sound confident and career-focused, "I see myself in a position where I can contribute meaningfully to a team while continuing to grow professionally and personally." He nodded like I'd said something profound, making notes on his tablet. "And what would you say is your greatest weakness?" "My greatest weakness? Where do I even start? I'm a middle-aged man whose wife and daughter treated him like furniture for a month before serving him divorce papers. I haven't updated my resume since the Bush administration. I still think LinkedIn is something you do with sausages. I sometimes care too much about doing quality work," I said, delivering the most bullshit answer in the history of job interviews. "Interesting," he said, clearly not finding it interesting at all. "And where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Wait, hadn't he already asked that question? I looked at him more carefully, and realized he was reading from some kind of script, probably asking the same questions to every poor bastard who walked through that door. "Not living with my mom," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning in the next room. His pen stopped moving. His eyes widened like I'd just confessed to a crime. "I'm sorry, what?" I said. "I'd like to be in a position where I can contribute to the company's growth while expanding my skill set in a dynamic environment." But it was too late. The damage was done. He'd heard what I really said, and we both knew it. I didn't get that job. Or the next one. Or the 10 after that. Turns out, honesty isn't the best policy when you're a 45-year-old man trying to restart your life after your family decided you were about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. I was starting to think I'd be mopping floors and living in my teenage bedroom until I qualified for Social Security when I saw a help wanted sign at Thompson Construction. Yeah, Thompson Construction, no relation, but the coincidence felt like some kind of cosmic joke. The foreman was a guy named Big Mike who looked like he could bench press a pickup truck and probably had at some point in his life. He was standing in front of a half-built house, wearing a hard hat that had seen better decades and boots that had walked through more construction sites than I'd at hot dinners. "You ever done construction work?" he asked, looking me up and down like he was evaluating livestock. "No," I said, because lying seemed like a bad way to start a conversation with a man who could probably crush my skull with his bare hands. "You afraid of hard work?" "No." "You got a bad back?" "Bad knees." Any medical conditions that'll have you filing workers' comp claims every time you lift something heavy? No. You show up on time? Yes. You show up sober? Yes. You got reliable transportation? I thought about my 15-year-old Honda that made noises like it was slowly dying but still managed to get me from point A to point B most of the time. Yes. Big Mike studied me for another few seconds, probably wondering why a guy in khakis and a button-down shirt was applying for a construction job. You running from something? He asked. Yeah. I said, deciding that honesty had worked so well in my previous interviews. My family. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine belly laugh that shook his whole frame. Fair enough. My ex-wife's been trying to take half my paycheck for the past 10 years. Sometimes a man's got to do what a man's got to do. And just like that, I had a job. Construction work, it turns out, is the perfect therapy for a man whose life has imploded. There's something deeply satisfying about building something with your hands, about seeing actual progress at the end of each day. Every nail you drive, every board you cut, every wall you frame is tangible proof that you accomplished something. Plus, the guys on the crew actually talked to me. Revolutionary concept, I know. They made jokes, asked about my weekend plans, included me in conversations about sports and weather and the general incompetence of politicians. It was like discovering I was still human after months of being treated like a malfunctioning appliance. The work was brutal at first. Muscles I'd forgotten, I had started screaming at me every morning, reminding me that sitting behind a desk for 20 years had not prepared my body for manual labor. My hands developed calluses that made my old insurance office paper cuts look like beauty marks. But I kept showing up. Every morning at 7 a.m., hard hat on, lunch bucket packed by my mother who seemed genuinely proud that her son was doing honest work again. The guy started calling me Dad Jokes Marcus because apparently my sense of humor, which had been completely unappreciated by my former family, was exactly what a construction crew needed to get through long days of backbreaking work. Hey Marcus, Tony the electrician would call out during lunch break. Tell us the one about the guy who walked into a bar with jumper cables. The bartender says, I'll serve you, but don't start anything. I'd deliver with perfect timing, and the whole crew would crack up like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. It stung a little, being known for dad jokes when my own daughter had rolled her eyes at every attempt I'd made to make her laugh. But these guys appreciated my humor, looked forward to it even. They'd save up construction-related puns all week just to try to out-joke me. I started saving money for the first time in years. Not much at first, but enough to start thinking about getting my own place instead of sleeping in a twin bed surrounded by my high school baseball trophies. I opened a separate bank account. One that didn't have Claire's name on it. One that represented the possibility of a future that belonged entirely to me. Slowly, very slowly, I started to remember who Marcus Thompson was when he wasn't trying to be the perfect husband and father. I was a guy who could make people laugh. A guy who showed up when he said he would. A guy who could learn new things and work hard and contribute something meaningful to a team. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The crew called me Dad Jokes Marcus, and you know what? I was okay with that. At least they were listening. 5 years. 5 whole years of rebuilding my life from scratch, and I'd gotten pretty damn good at it. I had my own apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. 1 bedroom, decent kitchen, and a living room where I could watch whatever I wanted on TV without asking permission or sitting through another episode of some reality show about people whose biggest problem was choosing between designer handbags. The apartment complex was called Pine Grove, which was a laugh because there wasn't a pine tree in sight, and the only grove was the parking lot full of cars that had seen better decades. But it was affordable, quiet, and best of Grove was the parking lot full of cars that had seen better decades. But it was affordable, quiet, and best of all, nobody there knew about my previous life as an invisible husband and father. My neighbors were a mix of young professionals just starting out, older folks who'd downsized after their kids moved away, and people like me who were rebuilding after life had knocked them down a few pegs. We had this unspoken understanding that everyone was there for a reason, and nobody asked too many questions about what that reason might be. I'd settled into a routine that actually made me happy, which was a weird feeling after years of going through the motions. Monday through Friday, I'd get up at 6, grab coffee and a breakfast sandwich from the little deli down the street, and head to whatever job site Big Mike had us working on that week. The construction company had grown, and I'd work my way up from guy who carries stuff to guy who actually knows how to build stuff, which came with a pay raise and a lot more job security. Evenings were mine. Sometimes I'd grab dinner with the guys from work. Sometimes I'd stay home and cook something that didn't require a committee vote on seasoning choices. Weekends were for catching up on sleep, doing laundry, Maybe catching a ball game at the local sports bar where the bartender knew my name and my usual order. It wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. It was mine. And after 5 years of living like this, I'd almost convinced myself that this was how the rest of my life would go. Work, home, sleep, repeat. Maybe I'd get a dog eventually, one of those loyal mutts who'd actually be happy to see me when I walked through the door. Then the phone rang. It was a Tuesday evening in March. I was microwaving leftover pizza and debating whether to watch the news or find something mindless on Netflix when my cell phone started buzzing on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't answer it because the number wasn't in my contacts, and these days the only unknown numbers that called me were either telemarketers or robots trying to sell me extended car warranties. But something made me pick it up. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was just muscle memory from the days when answering the phone was part of being a responsible adult. Hello? Marcus. The voice hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't heard it in 5 years, but I recognized it immediately. Claire. My ex-wife was calling me like we were old friends who'd just lost touch, like she hadn't spent our last month together treating me like a piece of furniture that needed to be removed. I almost hung up. My finger was literally hovering over the end call button when she spoke again. Marcus, are you there? Yeah. I managed to say, leaning against the kitchen counter because suddenly my legs felt unreliable. I'm here. Hi. I wasn't sure if this was still your number. It's still my number. What I didn't say was that I'd kept the same phone number specifically in case Sophia ever wanted to reach out to her dad. 5 years of hoping for a call that never came. And instead I get Claire. There was this awkward pause where neither of us seemed to know what to say next. The microwave beeped, reminding me that my pizza was ready, but I ignored it. This conversation felt like it was about to go somewhere I wasn't prepared for. How have you been? She asked, and I could hear something in her voice that I couldn't quite identify. Nervousness maybe? Regret? Or just the awkwardness of calling someone you'd systematically ignored until they disappeared from your life. I've been fine, Claire. Actually, better than fine. I've been good. And I meant it. I wasn't just saying that to make her feel better or worse about how things had ended between us. I genuinely was good. Maybe not the life I'd planned, but a life that belonged to me. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Another pause. I could hear noise in the background. Voices, maybe music. It sounded like she wasn't alone, which made this phone call even weirder. Claire, why are you calling me? It's been 5 years. I know. I know it has. She took a deep breath, the kind people take when they're about to say something difficult. Marcus, Sophia is getting married. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck carrying a load of emotional baggage. Sophia, my little girl who used to make me Father's Day cards with crooked hearts and stick figure drawings. The kid who used to fall asleep on my chest during movie nights when she was small enough that I could carry her upstairs without throwing out my back. Mary, I said, because apparently my vocabulary had been reduced to single-word responses. Yes, to a really nice guy named David. They met in college, and they've been together for 2 years now. The wedding is next month. Next month. My daughter was getting married next month, and I was finding out about it during a random Tuesday night phone call. Not through a formal invitation. Not through a heart-to-heart conversation about walking her down the aisle, but through a phone call that felt more like a courtesy notification than an actual invitation to participate in my own daughter's life. Congratulations, I said, though congratulations seemed like an inadequate response to finding out your daughter had apparently been living an entire adult life that you knew nothing about. Marcus, Claire's voice got softer, more hesitant. You should come. I almost dropped the phone. After 5 years of complete silence, after being treated like I'd never existed, she was inviting me to Sophia's wedding like it was the most natural thing in the world. You want me to come to the wedding? Yes. I mean, she's your daughter. You should be there. I started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that happens when life becomes so absurd that your brain can't process it any other way. I laughed so hard I started choking, had to grab a glass of water, and take several deep breaths before I could speak again. Oh, now I exist. I said when I finally found my voice again. Now I'm her father? What happened, Claire? Did you need someone to pay for half the catering? Need a guy to move tables around? Or does your new son-in-law need roofing advice? Marcus, please don't be like this. Be like what? Surprised that after 5 years of being dead to my own family, I suddenly get resurrected for a wedding invitation. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Claire? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. There was another long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. For a moment, I felt almost sorry for her. This call couldn't have been easy to make, and whatever had motivated it was probably more complicated than just wanting me at the wedding. She misses you, Claire said finally, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Funny way of showing it. 5 years, Claire. 5 years without a phone call. A text. A birthday card. Nothing. And now she misses me. People change, Marcus. Time changes things. Yeah, it does. It changed me from someone who would drop everything for his family into someone who's learned to live without them. But even as I said it, I could feel my resolve wavering. This was my daughter we were talking about. My little girl who was apparently all grown up and getting married to someone I'd never met. A guy named David who probably had no idea that his future father-in-law had been erased from family history like some kind of inconvenient relative. Just think about it, Claire said. Please. The wedding is April 15th, 2 o'clock, at the Riverside Country Club. Just think about it. The Riverside Country Club. Of course. Because apparently Sophia's wedding was going to be exactly the kind of fancy affair that would have been completely out of our budget when we were married. But somehow Claire had managed to afford it in the 5 years since I'd been gone. I'll think about it. I heard myself saying, though I had no idea where those words had come from. Thank you, she said, and she sounded genuinely relieved. Marcus, it really is good to hear your voice. And then she hung up, leaving me standing in my kitchen with a phone in one hand and cold pizza in the other, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to my peaceful Tuesday evening. My daughter was getting married. And somehow, despite everything, I was invited. Against every logical thought in my head, against every ounce of self-preservation I'd developed over the past 5 years, I knew I was going to go. Curiosity, they say, killed the cat. But in my case, it was probably going to buy me a suit. The Riverside Country Club looked like something out of a magazine for people who would weigh more money than sense. I'm talking marble columns, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my annual salary, and enough fresh flowers to stock a small florist shop. The kind of place where they charge you $50 for a sandwich and call it artisanal because they cut the crusts off. I sat in my 15-year-old Honda in the parking lot for a solid 10 minutes, watching guests arrive in cars that looked like they'd driven straight off a luxury showroom floor. BMWs, Mercedes, a couple of Teslas that probably drove themselves to the wedding because their owners were too important to handle something as mundane as steering. Meanwhile, I was sitting there in a suit I'd bought at Men's Warehouse during their buy one, get one half off sale, wondering what the hell I'd been thinking when I decided to show up to this thing. The salesman had assured me I looked distinguished, but I was pretty sure distinguished was retail speak for old guy trying too hard. I'd spent the last 3 weeks going back and forth about whether to actually come. Part of me wanted to stay home, order pizza, and pretend this whole thing wasn't happening. But the bigger part of me, the part that was apparently a glutton for punishment, needed to see what my daughter's life looked like without me in it. The wedding program I'd been handed at the door listed Sophia as Sophia Claire Martinez Thompson, which was a mouthful and made me wonder when she'd started hyphenating her name. The groom was David Michael Harrison, which sounded like the kind of name that came with trust funds and country club memberships. I found a seat in the back, naturally, close enough to observe the festivities but far enough away that I could make a quick exit if things got weird. Which, knowing my luck, they probably would. The venue was decorated like someone had given Martha Stewart an unlimited budget and a mandate to make everything sparkle. White roses everywhere, ribbons that probably cost more per yard than my weekly grocery bill, and enough candles to illuminate a small town. The kind of wedding that makes you wonder if people are getting married or summoning angels. I recognized exactly 0 people in the crowd, which wasn't surprising considering I'd been out of the family loop for 5 years. These were probably Claire's friends, David's family, people from Sophia's college life that I'd never been introduced to. I was like a tourist at my own daughter's wedding, observing from the outside looking in. The ceremony started with a violinist playing something classical and emotional while guests dabbed at their eyes with tissues that probably cost more than my lunch. Everyone stood as the wedding party made their entrance, and I had to admit, they'd done a good job with the whole production. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, assuming fairy tales cost 50 grand and required valet parking. Then I saw her. Sophia appeared at the back of the aisle in a dress that looked like it had been designed by angels and cost more than my car. She was beautiful, not just pretty, but genuinely beautiful in that way that makes you forget to breathe for a second. My little girl, all grown up and radiant and absolutely stunning. And walking her down the aisle was some guy I'd never seen before in my life. Not me. Not her father. Some random dude in an expensive tuxedo who got to play the role I'd been written out of. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut by a professional boxer wearing brass knuckles made of pure emotional devastation. But then Sophia's eyes found mine in the crowd. The look on her face was priceless. Absolute shock, like she'd just spotted Bigfoot sitting in the third row munching on wedding cake. Her step faltered for just a second before she recovered her composure, but I caught it. That moment of pure, unfiltered surprise that said she'd had no idea I was coming. Which meant Claire had invited me, without telling her. This was getting interesting. I settled back in my seat to watch the show, because something told me this was about to become the kind of wedding that people talk about for years afterward. Not for the right reasons. The groom, David, was exactly what you'd expect from someone marrying into this level of fancy. Tall, handsome in that generic Ken doll way, probably had a trust fund and a job at his father's investment firm. The kind of guy who'd never had to worry about paying rent or buying groceries or any of the mundane concerns that occupy us regular people. The ceremony proceeded with all the traditional pomp and circumstance. Vows that sounded like they'd been written by a greeting card company. Rings that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. And enough tears of joy to fill a small reservoir. I sat quietly through the whole thing, trying to process the complicated emotions of watching my daughter marry a complete stranger. Pride, because she looked happy and beautiful and like she'd build a good life for herself. Sadness, because I'd missed all the events that led up to this moment. And a growing sense of anticipation, because I could feel the tension in the room building like pressure in a tea kettle. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the reception hall for cocktails and awkward small talk. I grabbed a beer from the bar. Thankfully, they had regular beer along with all the fancy champagne and wine that probably cost more per bottle than I made in a day, and found a corner where I could observe without being too obvious about it. That's when the whispers started. Who's that guy in the back? I don't recognize him. Is he family? He looks familiar, but I can't place him. I watched people stealing glances at me, trying to figure out where I fit into this whole production. Some of them looked like they were playing a game of Identify the Wedding Crasher, which was amusing since I was probably the only person there who'd actually been invited by the bride's mother. During the cocktail hour, I mostly kept to myself, nursing my beer and watching my daughter work the room like a professional hostess. She was good at it, gracious, charming, making everyone feel welcome and appreciated. Claire had done a good job raising her, I had to admit, even if she'd done it without any input from me. But I could see the tension building. Claire kept shooting nervous glances in my direction, like she was waiting for me to either explode or disappear. Sophia was smiling and playing the perfect bride, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was operating on autopilot, while her brain tried to process the fact that her supposedly absent father had materialized at her wedding like some kind of middle-aged ghost. When they called everyone to dinner, I found my seat at a table in the back with a bunch of people who introduced themselves with the kind of polite enthusiasm that meant they had no idea who I was but were too well-bred to ask directly. That's when someone at our table, I think it was David's aunt, based on the family resemblance and the way she'd been holding court all evening, decided to satisfy her curiosity. So, she said, leaning toward me with the kind of smile that meant trouble, how do you know the happy couple? The entire table went quiet, like they'd all been wondering the same thing but hadn't had the nerve to ask. I took a sip of my beer, looked around at their expectant faces, and decided that if I was going to be here, I might as well be honest about it. Well, I said, setting down my beer and giving them my best smile. I'm the invisible man they forgot to invite. A few people laughed, thinking I was making a joke. Others looked confused, trying to figure out what I meant. No, seriously. The aunt pressed, clearly not satisfied with my non-answer. Are you family? A friend from college. I looked across the room at Sophia, who was watching our table with the kind of expression people get when they're watching a car accident in slow motion. I'm her father, I said simply. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. And that's when I knew this evening was about to get very interesting indeed. The silence at our table stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 10 seconds. 10 seconds of people's brains trying to process the fact that the mystery guest they'd been speculating about all evening was actually the father of the bride. The father who apparently hadn't been mentioned in any of the wedding planning conversations they'd been part of. David's aunt. Let's call her Chatty Cathy because I never did catch her actual name. Looked like someone had just told her that Santa Claus was actually a tax auditor. Her mouth opened and closed a few times before she managed to speak. You're Sophia's father. Guilty as charged, I said, raising my beer in a mock toast. Marcus Thompson, deadbeat dad extraordinaire, at your service. The ripple effect was immediate. Word spread through the reception hall like wildfire in a paper factory. I could literally watch the whispers travel from table to table as people turned to stare at me with the kind of fascination usually reserved for zoo animals or reality TV stars having public meltdowns. Claire, who had been making the rounds and playing the gracious mother of the bride, suddenly looked like she'd swallowed a live grenade. Her wine glass was shaking in her hand, and she kept glancing between me and the exit like she was calculating whether she could make a run for it before the situation exploded completely. But it was Sophia's reaction that really caught my attention. She was standing near the head table, still in her gorgeous wedding dress, looking like she'd just realized she was the star of her own personal nightmare. The smile she'd been wearing all day had frozen on her face like it had been shellacked there. The questions started coming fast and furious from my table mates, who had apparently decided that dinner conversation was about to get way more interesting than they'd bargained for. Where have you been? Why haven't we met you before? Are you divorced? This is so awkward. Should we pretend we didn't hear that? I was fielding these questions like a politician at a hostile press conference when someone, I think it was David's cousin, based on the family jawline, asked the question that really mattered. Why haven't we met you before? I mean, if you're Sophia's father, where were you during all the wedding planning? The engagement party? The rehearsal dinner last night? That's when all eyes turned to Sophia, who was now looking like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. David, poor bastard, was standing next to her with the expression of someone who was slowly realizing that his new wife might have some family issues that hadn't been covered in their premarital counseling sessions. Sophia started, then stopped, looking around the room like she was hoping someone would come rescue her from this conversation. Come on, sweetie. I called out, loud enough for half the reception to hear. Tell them where Daddy's been for the past 5 years. Tell them about our wonderful family dynamic. Claire was making frantic hand signals at me from across the room, probably trying to communicate shut up in sign language, but I was way past caring about keeping family secrets at this point. Sophia took a deep breath, and I could see her trying to figure out how to spin this story in a way that didn't make her look like the villain. Good luck with that, kiddo. He abandoned us, she said finally, her voice barely loud enough to carry across the suddenly silent reception hall. My eyebrows shot up so fast I'm surprised they didn't launch into orbit. Abandoned? That's the story we're going with. You left, she said, louder now, getting defensive. You just up and left without saying anything. I stood up from my table, because this conversation required my full height and attention. Oh really? That's fascinating, because I remember it a little differently. The entire reception had gone quiet now. Even the waitstaff had stopped serving dinner to watch this family drama unfold. It was like being the main event at the world's most expensive Jerry Springer episode. I remember being ignored for a month straight like a broken Alexa. I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You know, Alexa, do the dishes. Alexa, take out the trash. Alexa, get out of our lives because we're too busy with our phones to acknowledge your existence. A few people in the crowd actually laughed, which probably wasn't the reaction Sophia was hoping for. You were, she started, then stopped, looking around at all the faces staring at her expectantly. I was what, sweetie? Use your words. You were annoying, she said finally, like she was confessing to a crime. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the air conditioning, the clink of silverware as someone nervously adjusted their place setting, and what sounded like Claire's sharp intake of breath from across the room. David, who had been standing next to his new bride looking increasingly confused and uncomfortable, suddenly spoke up. Wait, what? His voice carried across the reception hall with the clarity of someone who was having a very unpleasant realization. You ignored your own father? On purpose. Sophia turned to look at her new husband, and I could see panic starting to creep into her expression. David, it's complicated. How is it complicated? David's voice was getting louder, and I could see genuine anger starting to replace confusion on his face. You told me your father wasn't in your life because he abandoned you. You never said you ignored him until he left. It wasn't like that, Sophia protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what was it like? David demanded. Because from what I'm hearing, it sounds exactly like that. I decided to help clarify things, because I'm helpful like that. It was exactly like that, I said cheerfully. For a solid month, they treated me like I was invisible. Wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't acknowledge my existence. Went out of their way to avoid being in the same room as me. Hell, they even asked each other if they heard something when I tried to talk to them. Like I was a creaking floorboard. David's face was going through several interesting color changes. You treated your father like he didn't exist? He was being dramatic, Sophia said weakly. Dramatic? I laughed, and it wasn't a nice laugh. Honey, I was so invisible in that house that I started checking mirrors to make sure I still had a reflection. The guests were watching this family meltdown with the kind of horrified fascination people usually reserve for natural disasters or celebrity scandals. Some of them were clearly enjoying the show, others looked like they wanted to crawl under their tables and hide. David was staring at his new wife like he was seeing her for the first time, and what he was seeing apparently wasn't matching up with the woman he thought he'd married. Is this true? He asked Sophia directly. She looked around the room, probably hoping for some kind of rescue that wasn't coming, then back at David. It's not that simple. It seems pretty simple to me, David said, his voice getting dangerously quiet. You ghosted your own father until he left, then told everyone he abandoned you. David, please, can we talk about this later? No, he said, and the finality in his voice made everyone in the room sit up and take notice. I don't think we can. He started backing away from her, shaking his head like he was trying to clear notice. I don't think we can. He started backing away from her, shaking his head like he was trying to clear it. I can't. I can't be married to someone who thinks it's okay to treat family like that, he said. And then, in front of 200 wedding guests, an open bar, and enough flowers to stock a funeral home, David Harrison looked at his bride of approximately 4 hours and delivered the line that would be talked about at country club brunches for years to come. Weddings cancelled, he announced to the room. I don't want to be married to someone who thinks ghosting your own father is normal behavior. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor as he pushed it back was the only noise in the entire reception hall. And then he walked out. Just like that. Left his new wife standing there in her expensive wedding dress, surrounded by crystal and flowers and the smoking ruins of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. I looked around the room at the stunned faces, the open mouths, the general atmosphere of what the hell just happened here. And I had to admit, I was impressed. The kid had principles. More than I could say for his ex-wife, apparently. The exodus from that reception hall was something to behold. Guests scattered like roaches when someone flips on the kitchen light, muttering awkward excuses about early morning flights and babysitter emergencies. Amazing how quickly 200 people can disappear when free entertainment turns into uncomfortable family drama. Sophia stood there in her $10,000 dress, mascara running down her face like black rivers of regret, looking around at the rapidly emptying room like she couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. Claire was desperately trying to salvage something from this disaster, following guests to the door and making apologies that nobody wanted to hear. And me? I was having the time of my life. I walked over to the dessert table, grabbed one of those fancy dinner rolls that probably cost more than my lunch, and took a big bite. The bread was actually pretty good, buttery, warm, the kind of thing you'd expect at a place that charges $50 for chicken. Marcus. Claire appeared at my elbow, her voice shaking with either rage or panic. Maybe both. Say something. Fix this. I looked at her, then at Sophia who was standing there like a broken princess in a fairy tale gone wrong, and I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. No desire for revenge. Just this weird sense of peace, like a weight I'd been carrying for 5 years had finally been lifted. Fix what exactly? I asked, taking another bite of bread. Your daughter just learned that actions have consequences. David learned he was about to marry someone who thinks family loyalty is optional. Seems like everyone got educated today. Please, Sophia said, finally finding her voice. Just say something. I looked at my daughter, this young woman who'd grown up without me, who'd learned to live with the story that her father was a deadbeat who'd abandoned his family. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to be the dad who swooped in and made everything better. But that wasn't my job anymore. You know what, kiddo? I said, finishing my bread roll and dusting the crumbs off my hands. This has been the best wedding meal I've ever had. Really, top-shelf entertainment, great catering, and a lesson in karma that was worth the price of admission. I straightened my tie, my discount Men's Warehouse tie that had seen me through this whole ridiculous evening, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Claire called after me. Home, I said without turning around. To my apartment, where people don't pretend I don't exist. 5 years ago, they'd erased me from their lives like I was a mistake that needed correcting. Tonight, I'd come back louder than a fire alarm in a library, and this time, nobody could pretend they didn't hear me. I walked out of that country club, got in my 15-year-old Honda, and drove home laughing so hard, I had to pull over twice to catch my breath. Freedom tastes like dinner rolls and tastes even better with a side of perfectly served revenge.